I'm going to move up to an F lead to help me smooth out the gradient in the transition. Putting in the lighter tones has made it much easier for me to see the true values in the ball. Now I'm going to go back into the shadow with a B lead to darken it a touch. I chose a B lead because this area looks like fifth value, and because a B lead will fill in the larger grain the 6B and 3B pencils left behind. Notice you can barely see any of those hatching lines anymore. As you build up your hatching, it begins to read as a solid tone. Personally, I like to leave some in my drawings because I like the texture, but that's up to you. The more you practice, the more control you'll have over style decisions like that. I've switched back to a 4B lead to darken the right-hand side of the shadow some more. As I mentioned earlier, all values are relative to the values around them. That's why you're going to have to keep going back over areas you've already shaded to darken them. I've put together this quick animation to give you a visual example of what I mean. This is the example Wikipedia gives. I think we can all agree the A square looks darker than the B square. But when I put this single value bar across A and B, you can see that they're actually the exact same value. And that's why building up your pencil shading is the best approach. By building up all the values together, you can adjust them accordingly until they're all correct in context. Now that the shading on the left-hand side of the ball has been darkened, the shadow on the right looks too light. So I'll go back over it with my 6B pencil and darken it some more. This should be the last pass I need to do. Next, since I darkened the value in the shadow, I have to adjust the gradient to match the new shade. So switch to a 4H or even a 6H pencil if you have it, and go back over the gradient again to make the transition smoother. The transition isn't smooth enough yet, so I'm going to switch to a mid-range lead and shade in the midtones with a 2B. And this lead is good to fill in any larger grain left behind by the 3B and 6B leads as well. So feel free to shade over the entire shadow with it. Not hard enough to darken the value, just smooth it out a bit. I'll soften the transition from the darker value to the midtone next with a 6B. It just needs a minor adjustment. The shading on the ball looks good, so I'll start working on the drop shadow next, using my 6B pencil and lightly scumbling in the value. I want to make sure the line where the ball meets the table is as dark as possible. Making a heavy line where an object touches the surface it's sitting on is the trick to making it feel like it's grounded and has weight. I'm going to go into a much more in-depth explanation on line weight in the next lesson and expand on the subject throughout the course. It's extremely important to getting great drawings, but I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information all at once. Notice, the shadow isn't all 10th value. The side on the right is slightly lighter because more ambient light is getting in. Do your best to match that value change. Remember, this exercise is all about learning to control values, and that means paying close attention to subtleties like that. That tiny bit of light in the shadow plays an important role. It's just light enough to keep the edge of the ball from getting lost in the darkness, which would make that whole area become one dark, flat shape. And you want your drawing to have as much form and depth as possible. As a rule, a drop shadow will be darker the closer it is to the object casting it, and the edge of the shadow will be harder the closer it is as well. The further away the shadow is from the object, the lighter it gets, and the softer the edge gets. I'm just sharpening my pencil. The sharper it is, the less grain you'll get. It gets to be a real issue with these softer leads. That's one of the reasons why as we progress in the course, I'm going to reduce the range of pencils you use. By the end of this course, I'd like to see you using just a 2B, B, and H lead to complete your drawings. Okay, let's put in more of this background, which looks like third on the lighter side, let's say fourth value, so I'll pick up my F lead. You don't have to worry about staying in the lines, just shade right over all the work you did on the ball and drop shadow. The F lead is lighter than any of the pencils you use for all that shading, so it won't affect the value at all. If you haven't gotten a nice hatching line yet, just keep practicing. That's what this exercise is for. You have to practice these movements to train your muscles to make them effortlessly. But it's like riding a bike. Once your muscle memory learns it, it'll just click. Be patient, it'll happen. As long as you're practicing good habits, it's just a matter of time. Your shading doesn't have to be as patchy as mine. As I said before, I prefer the look and texture of hatching lines, so feel free to use whatever shading technique you like best. The top of the background is a few values darker, so I'm going to switch to a 2B pencil and start darkening it and transitioning the gradient. I'm moving to a 3B lead to bring the top of the background up a value. Finally, I'll switch to a B lead to shade in the lighter area on the bottom of the background. It definitely takes some patience to fill in large areas with a hard pencil lead, but you have to learn to enjoy the process. You'll know you're getting good at it when one day you'll stop thinking about it and it'll just be this mechanical motion your hand is making. That's when it starts to feel almost meditative. The hatching really gives the drawing some much needed energy and motion. And it's about finished. That concludes lesson 2. In the next lesson, you're going to put all these techniques to the test drawing hands.